Welcome everyone to NCEA's It's a One-to-One and iPad World, So How Do I Live, Teach, and Lead in It webinar. My name is Kate Reich and I am on hand to help with any technical questions about today's event. Before we begin, I have some housekeeping matters to share with you. First, please know that all of your microphone connections with today's webinar have been muted. During the presentation, you may ask questions or provide comments for the presenters by using the chat and/or question functions located in the GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen. To use these functions, click on the chat or question bubble and then click into the blank box area and enter your question using your keyboard. Then click Send. We also invite you to post your questions on todaysmeet.com. I am sending out the link to that website, which is todaysmeet.com/April, the number 1, and then you spell out 1-to-1. But I will resend the URL a few times just to make sure that you all have a chance to join us online. Second, the webinar presentation will run for 45 minutes, leaving some time at the end for the presenters to answer any questions that you've provided. Third, you will be asked to complete a brief evaluation about this webinar later today, and your feedback is greatly appreciated. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and you will all receive a copy of the final recorded presentation, which we will email to you once those files are available. I'm very pleased to present Kathy Mears, Executive Director of NCEA's Elementary Schools Department, and Greg Duvetter, the Superintendent of Schools from the Diocese of Orange. Greg presents today based on his wealth of experiences in both educational technology and Catholic education, and most specifically from his real-time experiences of implementing a one-to-one program throughout the Diocese of Orange that will be fully implemented in 2015. Please welcome Kathy and Greg.
Thank you, Kate. I'm very glad to be here with everyone this evening. I have to give a shout out to Carol in the Archdiocese of San Francisco because she sent me a picture, and she and her teachers are going to have some chocolate-covered pretzels, grapes, and low wine while they're listening to Greg. So I can think of nothing better. So please do whatever you need to do to enjoy yourself this evening. The Today's Meet link is very important. The reason being, if you put questions there, Greg has up to a month to answer them, and he has told me he will go back and review the questions and answer them. So the todaysmeet.com/April, the number 1, and then the word 1-to-1 is the link, and we would welcome you to join us there. Greg is a great superintendent. He is a great teacher, and he is very good at doing webinars. So you're in for a treat. And Greg, I want to thank you for doing this for NCEA. We're very glad to be able to present you and talking about one-to-one programs. So go ahead.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for being on board for this webinar. I think that I am definitely want to salute those people who are sharing the wine, because I certainly am better if you do have wine. It's an iPad and one-to-one world, so how do I live, teach, and lead in it? Now, you notice it says iPad and one-to-one. I'm going to be talking a lot about iPads today, but I am going to be talking about one-to-one programs in general as well. I'm trying to anticipate who you are. I know that there must be administrators out there who are in the middle of going one-to-one or thinking about it, or have already gone and want to be able to share with others what they've been seeing. Teachers who are learning to teach within this format, and others who will be involved in administration, superintendents, and so on. Here's a little bit about me. These are the calling cards of the modern speaker. Well, of course, first my email address, gduvetter@rcbo.org. As I like to say, every time I give a talk, it is a lifetime guarantee. All you have to do is send me an email, and I like it if you tell me when you heard me talk and ask me a question. I'll be happy to answer you in any way that I can. I am a rabid user of Twitter, and I am a huge supporter of the Twitter group Catholic Ed Chat, which is a hashtag for a group that meets every Saturday morning. On the West Coast, it's from 6 to 7. So my first comment is always, you'll know me by yawn stretch, but back east it's a little bit more manageable. Come join us sometime on Twitter. Twitter is probably the best tool for teachers. You can learn more from more people, and you can be more involved by using Twitter than almost anything else that's out there. My blog's called workwithhope.net. If you have a few moments to get involved with that today or check it out, you'll find that I actually talked about one of the topics I'm going to be mentioning today that I had to change my talk just over the weekend. The Delicious address. For those of you who don't know Delicious, Delicious is a bookmark saving and sharing site. And what you do with Delicious is you can save bookmarks under particular tags. I saved bookmarks of all the sites that I looked at to prepare for this presentation, including a copy of this presentation under delicious.com/gdobetter/iPad. And as I continue to give this presentation live and on webinars and other places, I find more resources and I dump them in there. So checking it from time to time is a worthwhile place to get new information. Todaysmeet.com/April1 1-to-1. Probably not the easiest to get through, but I've been really excited to see how many people are participating. It's a great place to ask additional questions. It's also a great place, if you're bored, to talk to other people who are listening onto this webinar. That's a bit who I am. I'm involved with one-to-one programs, and I believe that one-to-one is vital for us. And I've come to believe that the iPad is one great way of doing this, but it wasn't always the case. I want to start here a little bit with what we're doing here. I think if you're in administration or teaching or any way involved with a Catholic school, you often wake up in the morning with this your question: what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? Well, we're going to talk about basically three things during the next 45 minutes or so. The first is I want to talk about basic guidelines for one-to-one implementation. We hear the word one-to-one anymore all the time. It seems to be the buzzword at teacher conventions and tech conventions, and anyone, it's always, so when are you going one-to-one? How are you going one-to-one? What are you doing for one-to-one? Well, let's talk a little bit, let's demystify that, and let's talk about how you can get there in your school. The second, I want to talk about a classroom approach to one-to-one. Although it may be administrators and tech coordinators who plan it for a school, teachers have to implement it. And I think there are many ways of doing this, and I'm going to be taking a functions approach to this. The idea being that we're not going to do tons of things, we're going to do a few things that really reinforce teaching the best we possibly can. And finally, to follow that up, we'll talk about the one-to-one toolbox. And yes, I'll be giving you a number of apps that you can use on the iPad or tablets or any device, but to give you sort of a starting place and some solid apps, most of which are free, that you can use. So that's where we're going. Where have we come from? We've come a long way in a very short period of time. At a recent workshop, I asked people to tell me how long has the iPad been around. And I had volunteers who said 7 years, 10 years. The iPad has been around for 3 years. And look where it's gone. From where I looked at it and said, how are we not getting less for more, a machine with dramatic limitations for nearly twice the cost, to this device, which in many ways is the biggest thing in education. And I would say this, even if you don't choose the iPad, which there are many great reasons to not choose the iPad for your one-to-one implementation, the iPad has done more to drive one-to-one implementation than any other device that's come forward. So it's really become a reality that we all have to deal with. In fact, when teachers want to do a one-to-one implementation, one of the first parent questions is, well, aren't we using iPads? It's become so big a part of our world. But we've been able to, because of that, change a little bit about the way we've done our classrooms. So let's start with this idea of one-to-one. Why one-to-one? Teachers need to answer parents. Administrators need to answer teachers and parents. Superintendents have to answer God, teachers, and parents. And there are some very clear reasons for why we're doing this. But let's start with the basic of what is one-to-one. because many people use this term fairly loosely, and I mean something very specific with it. One-to-one means that each student has daily access to the same digital device for use whenever appropriate. If you're using a cart in several classrooms, even if every kid has an iPad or computer, that's not truly one-to-one as I mean it, because the student doesn't necessarily use the same machine all the time, so he or she does not become very comfortable with it. And secondly, they're not able to use it whenever they want. The idea of having that always out there. Now, ironically, in a computer lab, it is harder to teach students when not to use a computer than when they have one-to-one. If you're in a computer lab, or if you reserved the cart for that afternoon, you are able to say, we're going to use this right now, but you're not going to say, oh, no, put away the computers for right now. That's your hour. That's all you get. But when students have the machines out on their desks, it is good for teachers to say, this is not an appropriate time for us to be using our computers. Everybody close them or turn them upside down or however you handle it. You can actually teach better digital citizenship when students have the machines with them all the time. So it's important that we're looking at something that they would own or that the school would own and they would issue to a kid for an entire year, but it would have to have that feeling of ownership. Finally, the comfort that's involved in ownership can't be underestimated. Very often we hear about people having trouble with machines. It's because they're not used to them. I am so used to where everything is on my iPad, I don't have to think. And kids get the same way, and teachers get the same way. So that's what we're heading for. There are basically 5 reasons why I think we need to be looking at one-to-one in all of our schools. The first is access. Through one-to-one, children in a classroom are provided access to resources and capabilities that they never were able to have before. And it is an equalizer in that a small school's one-to-one program and a large school's one-to-one program will probably provide access to the same resources. The walls of the classroom are not limiting the students anymore because they can go beyond the walls of the classroom and beyond the time of the school day. Also, we can bring in people and resources into a classroom through Skype and other ways. Suddenly we're able to bring people in that we weren't able to bring in before. Access is very important. Second is anticipation. Textbooks are changing faster than any of us know. And like many things, it's an economic reason. Textbook companies are recognizing that though they want to sell paper textbooks for as long as they possibly can, there will come a time in the not too distant future when it will be too expensive for them to maintain a paper version and a digital version. And I know the paper version is going to be the one that will disappear. So if we choose not to have one-to-one devices or not able to have one-to-one devices of some sort, our students are going to be limited in the resources that they have. Paper resources are going to become more expensive, and they're going to become more rare and probably not the best stuff out there. Digital texts can be superior to paper texts in that they're not limited to the text and pictures that a paper text is and can have much more participation. So we're anticipating a change that we see is coming by going one-to-one. Engagement. I don't really even need to talk about this. We know how much they are engaged with technology. Our students are readily using technology the entire day except for 8 hours of every day. And as I like to ask, what are they doing during those 8 hours? They're in school. The one place where we're theoretically preparing them for the future in which they're living is the place where they're using technology the least. We know they can be engaged by effective use of technology. We can take some of that use, some of that engagement, and use it towards learning. And I'm not saying we turn things into games, Although game strategy can fit into learning, it shouldn't be the primary thing. But the engagement of working one-to-one, to getting feedback immediately, all those things can really help. Oh, this is so important, individualization. This is what we've always wanted to do. We've wanted to create the perfect program for everyone who sat in front of us in our schools. But we know we can't do it. We break them into groups, we have them work on individual assignments, but we know we are never hitting more than 3 or 4 levels at a time. When we recognize there are maybe 30 sets of individual needs, there are great opportunities with new learning systems that are coming out to provide assessment of students where they are, individualized instruction, reassessment, leveling up when they need to level up, the individual growth, and the remediation that's possible through one-to-one technology is something we're just tapping that's going to become something that will transform what we've done in our classrooms going forward. All of this basically falls under the large umbrella of what I call authenticity. If you went home today and your principal told you, I want you to write a report, but don't use a computer, or principals, if your superintendent says, I'd like you to use a typewriter, not a word processor, you would say, this is nuts. I use technology every day. It is part of my life. These kids will live in a world where technology will be part of their life every day. It is important that we teach them how to use it well, how to use it smartly, and how to use it ethically all the time. So it's a real value as we go forward. That's really why we do this. But recognize this, one-to-one is the end, not the beginning. If you are saying we are going to do one-to-one tomorrow, there are many questions you need to answer before you start. And one-to-one is really the icing on a long cake that you've been making for a great period of time. One of the first issues that you're going to have to deal with is bandwidth. Your schools probably have bandwidth to serve maybe a computer lab and the administrative functions. But in order to do one-to-one effectively, you have to have enough bandwidth for every machine that is in the grade levels that you're doing it with, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or all the grade levels, and an effective Wi-Fi distribution system. Now, bandwidth is amazing how much we're going to need. People will ask me, there are about 200 people on this call right now, and you could all ask me how much bandwidth do I need, and the answer would be the same for all of you. How much bandwidth do you need? More than you have. It's going to grow exponentially. Now, what does that mean in terms of your planning? In terms of getting bandwidth to your school, the hard wiring that we did for DSL lines is going to become completely not enough going forward. It is going to not serve us, and so you really, if at all possible, need to have a fiber line going into your school. A fiber line not only has great capacity, it is scalable. So if you need 50 this year and 60 and 80 and 100, it can grow with you, whereas the DSL lines never were able to grow with you. Finding ways to get the bandwidth issue. Recognizing that bandwidth for this much will cost significantly more are challenges that you need to be facing as schools. And I encourage as diocese, in my diocese, we worked together to do this at all of the school sites. And because of that, we were able to save money on what would have been just completely impossible programs. Infrastructure. You don't know how many places there are in your campus till you try to blanket it with Wi-Fi. Luckily, if you have a solid infrastructure done by a good professional, you will be able to learn and grow with your system by putting in additional access points as it grows. But if you can't if you have so few access points that suddenly you have 30 machines all hitting the same access point, when things go slowly, it really tends to hurt the confidence in the program. So that's very important. The finance questions. Now, I could do a whole day on finance questions and finance models. My personal belief is that there does need to be parent participation, and I always recommend that it be done separate from tuition. That you would have parents pay a technology fee. I usually use about $30 a month as my basis, and then if you use equipment for 3 years, you've more than paid for the equipment, and the parents are able to get able to carry it without buying a $600 device right up front. It's challenging. Tuition is challenging. So we're essentially talking about a $30 a month increase for some people, and you do need to find ways to help the people who are not able to pay for this. In some of our schools, it's treated the same as tuition assistance. They are paying, everybody pays, but they are expected to pay at a level commensurate with the amount of tuition that they are paying. And interestingly enough, we have found collections on the iPad rentals to be easier than tuition collection because people feel this is a very tangible thing, and they make a good connection with how valuable it is for their children. Policy questions. What are going to be your policies for how the machine is used in the classroom? If it's going outside of the classroom, how are you handling filtering inside the classroom? Are you going to try to use a mobile device manager to filter the machines when they're out of the classroom? What are you going to do with breakage? What are you going to do when they do something wrong, which they will? All these types of things have to be worked on. There are many models for these policies out. If you search on the internet, you'll find other schools because everybody's working them out. This is really where I want to suggest share with people in your diocese, share with people who are nearby in your district. Don't reinvent the wheel over and over again. Finally, training. Training teachers and training students and training parents for the support they're going to have to give. All of these things take time. So one-to-one is something that you do at the end of all of these things, not first and then finding that out. Now, device options. If you're considering a one-to-one program, you're probably looking at one of 4 options. And I'd like to talk about each of them very briefly and sort of talk what I think are the pros and cons of each one. Usually, right now, if you talk about one-to-one, people are talking about the iPad. This is because it is a very strong device. It works very well with schools. It is moderately priced compared to where laptops were a few years ago, and it works very well for many of the things that students do. Drawbacks to the iPad are it doesn't print very well. It could be more expensive than some other devices. And there are challenges that some things it doesn't do as smoothly as a full-size laptop. Okay? You can do more and more things with the iPad all the time. In fact, I'm going to be talking about a big addition that just happened within the last week. But there are some things that you do have to work around. Flash is disappearing, but it is still there. If you use Prezi, the iPad, you cannot create Prezis. It's a strong platform. It's a challenge to deal with Apple. I will try to be very political here and say Apple is a challenging company to deal with, and please always assume they are not your friend. They are not there to help you. They will not be there when things go wrong. If you want to go in the iPad route, you really need to watch out because lots of people have been bitten by the apple. Many people go with a traditional laptop. A traditional laptop has full functionality. It might cost a little bit more than an iPad, but there are no limitations to what it can do. It can run full Windows or whatever you're working with. It can run full Office. It can run the things that we've been used to in the past. Some people say the laptop is a better creation device. I don't know, but perhaps it is. The one big challenge I see with laptops is weight and cumbersomeness. I think that as we are reading more and more texts from our digital device, clamshell devices like laptops are a little bit problematic. They're not as heavy, but at the same time, it's hard to curl up with this clamshell device, so I don't know how well that will work moving forward. On the other hand, the iPad is an excellent reading device. The Chromebook is a variation of the laptop. It is put out by Google. The Chromebook is a very inexpensive and probably the least expensive way to go one-to-one. It is an internet device, meaning that it has very limited functionality unless it's connected to the internet. And it uses the Google apps as all of its main applications. Now, if you want to use Microsoft apps, it really doesn't support them that well. But these things are going to be out there. Lots of people are having a lot of success with Chromebooks. I've been asked if people want to know if there's an alternative to Chrome. Well, not really, other than you're going to go with the new Microsoft products, the Windows 8 products out there. But Chrome is kind of its own little niche right now. No one else is big enough. Remember, you don't want to go into anything that's really tiny, because if you're out on a limb by yourself, you're not going to do very well. The final, of course, is BYOD, and I do want to talk about BYOD because a lot of places are using this. BYOD, bring your own device. I think it's very clear that this is where we're ultimately all heading. We're not going to be in the business of renting or selling computers to students. We're going to be saying, we need a machine that does X, Y, and Z, and you go out and get the one that does the best for you. Ultimately, I know that's where we're going. However, many schools do BYOD because they think of it as simple or a quick way to get to one-to-one, and I think it is anything but simple or quick. There are two areas that I think are real challenging with BYOD right now. First of all, BYOD assumes that students know how to use their machine with very little direction, and the teacher can give an assignment and the students can figure out how to do this. So BYOD assumes that, but a lot of kids are not there yet, and teachers have a very hard time if they're having to say, well, I have to give some directions for these iPad users, some for the laptop users, some for the iPhone users, and all of the other things that might be out there. Okay, so BYOD is challenging for teachers and requires a lot of training. The other concern I have is a little bit broader. When you let them bring in their own devices, it is virtually impossible to keep some students from bringing in 3G or 4G devices. And 3G and 4G mean that they can get outside of your filter with their school tools. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, of course, they always could with their phones anyway, and that's true. But there's a distinction, at least in my mind, between a phone that they bring in and a tool that's part of their work for the school. There isn't going to be a way around that. It's going to be about responsible use that we're going to have to teach them. And once again, I don't not support BYOD, but I really strongly think that we have to it should be a school that's highly competent with technology, not one that doesn't really want to go through some of these other models. I think most schools probably should go through at least one generation of a single device before they go to BYOD. Very smart people disagree with me on this, and I won't keep up the disagreement if that's what you feel. Very important here, no matter what you're using, it's going to be wrong eventually. Something else is going to come in. That's why I think we need to be working with the vocabulary of talking about our current device, our current device. Parents, our current device to do the things we want to do is this, which means that next year it may be another device, and it didn't mean you were wrong to do this. So always use that type of language, because the device, as always, is just a tool, and as tools change, we're going to be changing tools, but we're going to still do the same types of things. So Let's talk about how we use these things now. How do we develop the one-to-one toolbox? Many people approaching iPads particularly and others go into this app crazy approach, meaning get a million apps and do tiny little things with each one. So you might have 16 math apps, each one that teaches a different concept, and you'll have 35 language apps and a bunch of apps for vocabulary and a bunch of apps for this and a bunch of apps for that. I don't think this is the healthiest way to teach teachers or the healthiest way to conduct classes in one-to-one world. I know that many of you have probably gone to one of these workshops that says 60 apps in 60 minutes. And I know at the end of the 60 minutes I feel like I don't know anything. What I really want to be stressing is, and this should be our mantra, regular, predictable use. No matter what we use, we're going to use it regularly, every day, most days of the week, all of these, and more or less in the same way. In fact, I like apps that we're going to be using for more than one subject, because just like everything else you do in your classes, the more regularly you use something, the more consistent you are with your use, the better discipline is, and the better the learning is. So we're going to be looking at using, rather than 60 apps, we're going to use 4 apps, and we're going to use them all the time. The second, it's important we think about the sound pedagogical purpose. One of the things with all these apps, particularly the ones we just find, particularly ones that are free, is that they may not be effective. Apps that are in the App Store are there because they are not they won't cause viruses and they won't crash your system. It doesn't know whether they can teach or not. So we may be having kids do things that are not really valuable. So we can't just assume that something's there. So I really want to look at what is it that is teaching and how can we make it better. I used an analogy the other day. A teacher doesn't become different with one-to-one. One-to-one is like an Iron Man suit. If you think about Iron Man, Iron Man's just a guy, but he gets this suit that can make, and he still does all the movements that's involved. It just gives him power beyond what he had before. But it is even more of what he is. You're not less important as a teacher. You are more important. You are a teacher on steroids. No, I'm not suggesting that you take steroids. So we want to build teacher and student skills and avoid drowning in the app ocean. There's too many out there right now. The best apps for this, 16 apps for that, 500 apps for this. Let's calm it down a little bit and let's focus not on apps but on learning. So the teachers get good at it, they're comfortable with it, and the students get good at it. Students are not all genetically better at technology. It's so easy for us to say, and it's used all the time. These kids are so much better than us. And I would say in aggregate that's true. But there are kids who need help too. And so it's important that we develop use that is effective but not based on using a bunch of things only once in a while. We want to move away from the statement that there's an app for that to start thinking instead of, well, what is that we're trying to do, and going the other way. So let's start with the givens. And by givens, I'm saying I'm not even counting these because these are like pencils and pens for us. The first is productivity apps, and this is where I've had to rethink everything over just the last couple of days. So I'm going to give you an overview of things that you can use on iPads and other devices. If you have an iPad and it was activated after September of 2013, you should have had free access to the iLife suite. The iLife suite is Pages, Keynote, Numbers, and some other things as well. Given that it is free, it is probably pretty hard to suggest another route if you're going iPads for students to use. However, I will say I don't like those apps on the iPad very much, and I very seldom use them. But they are available. You can use them. They're out there. They're an answer. I would certainly not bring those into another device. The second answer, of course, is the Google Drive and all of the Google apps. Many schools are going to using these, and they're great on many devices, and of course they are the only direction you would go with Chromebooks. Google, of course, is free. Google has great sharing across multiple platforms. The challenges I would see if you are going iPads, I think that the interface is a little bit primitive, and their presentation software is very primitive. It's not anything like Keynote or PowerPoint. So that's not quite as good, but it is a great way of doing it. And also the great thing about the Google apps is you can share with multiple people looking at a document at the same time. The next one is an app that I've always used, and up until this past weekend, I've been saying this is kind of my alternative if you don't want to go to iLife. It was a thing called Office 2 HD, but they just changed the name of it over this weekend to Citrix ShareFile. It does cost. It costs, I believe, $7.99, and but it's very good. And I love the way it works. All the different apps work together because it has a word processor, a spreadsheet, and a presentation. The presentation stinks, of course. It also interfaces so well with Dropbox, which I love, and the others do not interface with Dropbox quite as well. Now, here's the big change that happened over the last week. Microsoft, everybody's been talking about using these other things, and the unspoken thing we always say is, well, what we want is Microsoft Office in some other form, because we can't have Microsoft Office on the iPad. Well, Office just released their apps for the iPad. They're good. They work well. The problem is they are very limited unless you have an Office 365 subscription. Now, this is the way Microsoft is basically changing their model. They're going to a subscription model of $99 a year rather than having people pay $300 for the suite for as long as they use it. If you take it from a home point of view, it kind of makes sense because I don't usually use a version for more than 3 years. And the nice thing about Office 365 is you can download it on 5 home machines and 5 mobile devices, all for that one subscription, and they're all linked together. Currently, I don't think this is going to be a viable option for our schools because no school can afford $99 per student per year on top of the other costs. However, I believe over a short period of time, Office is going to start saying there is going to be another model for schools. What I really think will happen will be about $10 a student per year. And then we're starting to think about it as being reasonable. Because if you had $10 and you're into Office, because let's face it, everybody thinks that Office format documents is what's expected. So it may be the most growing new app that we are going to be seeing here on the iPad in a while. Textbooks. If you have a one-to-one program, you need to have a group of teachers, a group of parents, a group within your diocese that's looking at electronic textbooks and deciding what are the good ones, what are the poor ones, what are the strengths and weaknesses of each one. Because I know principals feel like a lamb among lions as they're trying to find textbooks. But textbooks on a digital device can be superior to the textbooks that they find other places. And finally, leveled adaptive learning systems are things that will be growing that I described earlier, where we can have students trained on specific skills, and it can be leveled to their needs and adapt as they grow. These are still in their infancy. You'll see some things like Go Math, Think Through Math, etc. None of these are exactly what I'm thinking, but I could see it coming in the not too distant future. So then let's talk about 5 functions. How do we change our school? Well, as soon as teachers get iPads or digital devices, you need to go lesson planning paperless. You can have several lesson planning apps. Here are 3 that are available for the iPad. They integrate with the standards. Many times they have the standards built in, so you just have to click to put a standard with something. And you can share easily. I remember my wife used to always have to send her lesson plan book in to the principal on Monday, and she didn't get it back till Tuesday. Well, that's been across the country. That's the way it's been. Well, that didn't really make much sense. So now sharing is automatic. So the first thing you should change is how we report on lessons to one another. Second, presenting. We know that no matter how we change our classrooms, we're still going to have to present, and we're going to want our students to present. So Keynote, on an iPad, a student can both create and edit and show Keynote. PowerPoint, if you have a subscription, you can create and edit. If you don't have a subscription, you can still show a PowerPoint that you made somewhere else. SlideShark is a free app where you can show a PowerPoint that you've made from someplace else. And Prezi, for those of you who use Prezi out there, you cannot create a full Prezi on the iPad yet, but the Prezi app does allow you to show one that you made online from another machine. This is a great example of what I'm seeing happening with iPads everywhere. The iPad did not allow Prezi to do anything when it first came out, but eventually now you're able to make a very primitive Prezi presentation on your iPad, and I know it's only a matter of time before you'll be able to do the entire thing on there. Apps know that either you are on Prezi, either you are on iPad or you're nowhere. Someone just asked how much storage you need for textbooks. We usually say 32 gigs is usually the setup. You don't get 16 because many of these things have more needs. Let's see. Monitoring and assessment. Here's where we suddenly start changing the classroom. And if you show teachers this and they start to see how easy this is, it's an amazing app. And it's an app called Socrative. It's available on all platforms and can be used on multiple platforms at once. Many of us can think back to the time when we used the clickers. The students were able to click on to their system and they were able to show what they understood as they understood it. With Socrative, a teacher can ask a question and get immediate feedback, anonymous feedback from an entire class in a moment. A teacher can also give a quiz, and the teacher will get immediate feedback, and the students will get immediate feedback on whether they got their questions right or wrong. And teachers really like this. Socrative, when you give quizzes, has a way of randomizing the answer choices, which means that you can't look at the person next to you and get the answer choice that they're using. This is such a great way to use assessment to form education. One of the problems with assessments that we use today is it almost always takes too long to get it back to them for them to learn anything and for us to see it to learn anything for it. We can, in the middle of a class, know whether we need to spend more time on something, know whether we need to, or know whether somebody needs remediation on something. We can gather data in ways that we've never been able to before. Socrative changes a classroom in a way that very few other things do. I really encourage teachers in a one-to-one program to use it. Start saying, I'm going to use it 3 times a week, and before you know it, you're going to be using it every day of the year. It's really the strongest thing, and the one thing I don't understand about it is it's free. It's too good, but get it because it's great. The other is constructive learning through teacher demonstrations and student projects. All 3 of these, Educreation, Screen Chomp, and Explain Everything, allow students or teachers to record what they do on the screen, including their voice, and to share this with others. So a good example of how something like this might be used, rather than having a student do 50 math problems, how about having them just do 1 or 2 math problems and say, then I'd like you to do an edu-creations of a problem and explain what you're doing while you do it. Boy, you cannot show mastery better than that. And it also allows students to construct their learning, not just react in what they're doing. Also, teachers can make videos of things that students ask questions about often. I always like to say, if a student asks a question more than 3 times, make a video, and then you can always point them there where they can get more information. Edu-creations and ScreenChomp do almost exactly the same thing. ScreenChomp is a little bit more childlike in its graphics. Explain Everything is a little bit has more ability, but it also costs $2.99. The other 2 are free. Finally, the things that we use for organization. Cloud storage and sharing, Dropbox or Box.net. Very important programs which allow us to have our stuff available, whatever machine we might pick up. Evernote, where we are for taking notes, or Notability. Very similar. Evernote only allows you to type. Notability allows you to use writing as well with a stylus or with your finger. Evernote is free. Notability costs $2.99. Penultimate is tied into Evernote, and that allows you to use a stylus on a blank page. In fact, I always love having a penultimate page available when I'm using my iPad, because it allows me to go over and take notes really quickly anytime I want to. So these are some things that we would be using for storage, note-taking, and drawing or handwriting. Finally, what about you? How do you become more paperless in your own use as teachers or administrators? Remember that you have a scanner anytime you have a tablet. There are TurboScan's a good cheap one, but there are many great scanning. Start getting rid of paper. When you get a paper, unless it is absolutely vital, scan it and get rid of it. LandTech eSign, an amazing program. You take any PDF and it allows you to fill it in by putting in text or signature. Whenever I get an application or anything like that, I fill it in on LandTech. It never touches paper, and it's free. It's amazing. Finally, a QR reader, which we can use to read information that's available for us, and we can use QR codes to distribute information to our students and to our coworkers. I think the QR code is kind of the thumb drive of tomorrow, that you will be using QR codes to give files from one person to another. All of these will help you do paperless office. What we're seeing is a real change and moving from one type of classroom to another. Teachers are vital in this. Administrators are vital in this. We are all going to become iron men and women as we go through with abilities that we always wanted but never had before. And through that, and through one-to-one effectively used, we will change education as we know it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Greg. I really appreciate it. We've had a few questions. One is, do you have any recommendations for professional development for our schools that are just beginning to go one-to-one?
If Kathy is talking, I can't hear.
Okay. I am talking, and he can't hear me. Let's see if...
Kathy, what was your question again?
I was just asking Greg if we were going to go one-to-one, and we're just learning what PD would he recommend for one-to-one.
Okay. First of all, I have a sort of different opinion of PD than some others. I think that you get people started, you give them resources, and then you get out of the way. There is a trap with training where people can always say, I need more, I need more, I need more. I like to do a small bit of hands-on training, and then you make videos of how to do things for the people who don't remember how to do things. And then you say, I want you to do this. A little bit of information, resources, and expectations. One of the best trainings I could do is telling people, you've got to use this 3 times this week. And that's really helpful for them. So that's the way I tend to go at it. But notice we're not doing tons and tons of apps. So you could do an hour on each one of these, because remember, even for each section, you're probably only going to use one of the 3. that we're doing, or 4. So it's not something that you have to, don't have to spend days and days on this.
Okay. Greg, someone else wants to know about storage. They're worried if you have download some textbooks, or you use textbooks.
I mentioned that really quickly. Generally, we get, if you're talking about iPads, you get 32 gig, which seems to be managing what in most systems that we're looking at. If we are looking at so I would say it's not going to be as much problem with a laptop, because that will probably come with significant storage in it as well. And Chromebooks are going to be, you're not going to be downloading, you're going to be using cloud-based textbooks.
Okay. We have another question about textbooks from Terry, and Terry wants to know, how do you get around the fact that the textbooks are per student and the license goes with the student as they go to the next grade?
Oh boy, this was Terry? Terry, yes. I hear you. People are figuring this out, and please understand it is going to be extremely messy for the next 5 years and somewhat messy for the next 10 years. Nobody knows how to do this. Publishers, every time I meet with one of them, they have a new idea of how they're going to do this. And I say, you know, high school, it all makes sense, because, you know, they can save the money on a book that they used to have to buy. Elementary school, where a school would use text for many years, becomes a little bit more challenging. So that's something they're going to have to work with. I would say this is not, what you're describing is only one way that they're done. You can get renewable license. There are some places that are doing licenses that are essentially taken away from one student, given to the next student the next year. So it is something that will get worked out. But that's why you really need, and that's why you really need diocesan committees. We've put together a textbook committee as a subcommittee of our diocesan curriculum committee, just to look at these, because there are as many distribution methods as there are textbooks. But Terry, it's a mess.
Okay, that's a good answer. We'll take one more and then we'll call the night, because remember, you can go back to today's Meet for a month and Greg will answer your questions, so you can carry on a little bit of a conversation with him. It said that somebody uses Apple configurators to manage and supervise their devices. But the question is, so if they've created a lot of things like in Educreations, what do you do with them after? Where do you store all of the student works? Do you use
Educreations aren't stored locally. They are stored in the cloud. And there are some management capabilities that a teacher can manage their own work. So none of those are ever local. That's one of the benefits of them. I can't give you specifics on that. I'd probably work with it. I would probably find ways that you can tag or keep stuff further than that. It's a good question. Put it on the thing. I'll look it up. That's probably something I probably shouldn't just talk. I should go over it and practice it. But unless I have it in front of me, I can't picture it.
Sure. Well, Greg, we thank you very much. And just so you know, Greg will be speaking at our STREAM conference, which is Science, Technology, Religion, Engineering, Art, and Math this summer at the University of Dayton. Go Flyers, they may be Elite 8. This summer on June 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. So if you want to hear more from Greg, you can hear him there. And Greg also visits diocesan schools all the time. We really thank
I'm also going to be at NCEA.
What?
I'm also going to be at NCEA with my talk about failure, which is a great one.
It is. So he will be in Pittsburgh, too. So if you haven't made your reservation for Pittsburgh, please do so. So thank you, Greg, very much. And thank you, Kate. And thank you all for sharing so much on today's Meet. Please come back to it. I asked a couple of you, I'd like your emails so we can see about you writing some articles for our newsletter, because I can tell you're doing great things. And Casper, Wyoming, St. Anthony's, thank you for being here tonight. I think maybe it was the first time. And thank you to the people who've been here before, because I know that Christina's been here before because of the way she spells her name, and I know Autumn has been with us before, and so I appreciate very much that you participated on today's Meet and that you joined us. So have a wonderful evening. Keep doing what you're doing, because we appreciate it very much. And Kate, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Kathy and Greg, again, for the great information, and for all of you for participating and asking such great questions. This concludes today's It's a One-to-One and iPad World, So How Do I Live, Teach, and Lead in It webinar. We will be sending you an email in the next day or two with instructions on accessing the recorded webinar file as well as the presentation slides. We appreciate your time and invite you to visit our website at ncea.org/webinars to view the schedule of future webinar events. Thank you and have a great evening.